Welcome to the Trailhead from Ultra Sign Up, where big adventures begin. Trail running is so much more than just a sport. It's a community, a culture, a way of seeing the world. On this show, we're not dissecting splits or debating shoe specs. We're here to get to the heart of it all, the people, the places, and the stories that speak to the soul of the sport. Join me, Zoe Rome, and my co-host, Brendan Leonard, as we'll bring you conversations with the everyday athletes, local legends, quirky characters, and creative minds who make trail running what it is. Messy, joyful, gritty, and deeply human. Because it's not just about chasing finish lines. It's about the friendships forged on long climbs, the lessons learned in the pain cave, and the weird, wild moments that remind us why this sport is about so much more than the miles. If you're enjoying the Trailhead, the best thing you can do is help other people find us. Follow us on Spotify and subscribe wherever you listen. That way you'll get notified when a new episode drops. And if you have 30 seconds, leave us a review. It really does make a difference. And if you know someone else who might be into this, send it their way. Word of mouth is seriously everything. While you're at it, check out 2 other shows from the Ultra Sign Up Podcast Network. The Buzz with Buzz Burrell for the sharp philosophical deep dives you all know and love, and Between Two Pines for chaos and comedy. Something for every corner of your ultra running brain. Thanks for tuning in. This episode is brought to you by Running Warehouse. It's 2026. You've got new goals, and at some point you're going to need some new shoes to chase them. Running Warehouse has you covered with gear guides, honest recommendations written by real humans, and basically every shoe and piece of gear you could want for your best year yet on the trails. They're not just throwing product at you, they actually test the stuff and tell you what works and what might just be hype. Right now, they're highlighting their favorite trail running shoes of 2026. And if you're looking for a versatile trail runner, their pick is the Salomon Genesis. It's a solid do-everything shoe, whether you're logging miles on your local trails or lining up for something bigger. They've also got gear guides for apparel, shirts, shorts, sports bras, socks, so you can stop doom-scrolling reviews at midnight and get out on the trails. Check out their gear guides and set yourself up for your best year yet. Head to runningwarehouse.com or use the link in our show notes.
Zoe, what is your favorite recovery tactic?
Does pizza count? If
Yes,
so, I think that's the one I've probably been investing in the most heavily and can vouch for.
Is that because there's lots of studies that back up that pizza is
My N of 1 small sample size of just me in my life has found that there is a direct positive correlation, if not causation, between quantity of pizza consumed and quality of mileage run. I am a true believer in pizza. I'm a true believer in food as being one of the best recovery modalities. I think it's always the dumb, cheap stuff that ends up being effective, like pizza, naps. I'm a big believer in knitting in the evenings as a means of keeping me away from technology and keeping my hands busy. I know that there's probably not a lot of specific studies about the benefits of knitting for like mental health and running, but again, N of 1.
That's literally in the wording of a question I wrote to ask Christie. Knitting.
Perfect. I'm burying the lead.
I will change it. Okay.
What about you? What's your number 1 recovery tactic? Are you cold plunging? Are you doing sauna? Are you doing upside down push-ups, drinking ketones full of bicarb and AG1? What's your recovery of choice?
Pretty low tech. I just try to eat food and sleep, try to get as much sleep as I can. But yeah, I don't know. I like never try. I've tried a bunch of different things like tart cherry juice and turmeric back in the day, and realized, like, as maybe we'll discuss with Christie, that inflammation is actually helpful for your body to recover.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not. If I can just like sit down for a few minutes with a toddler, I'm in pretty good shape.
You're like, this is the best recovery ever. I'm just horizontal briefly.
Occasionally, I will work with my feet up. Put my feet up on something with my laptop.
This is one of the things that I think is such a funny sort of auxiliary of ultra running and trail running becoming more popular and becoming more professionalized is with the influx of money, there's also an influx of all of these products and doohickeys and things to spend your precious time and money on, so that now it's no longer enough to just get out there and do your workout, but you need to do it with $69 of bicarb coursing through your veins. And then afterwards, you need to recover with compression pants and a $17 ketone shot. And you need to do it in perfectly engineered recovery shoes that are unlike other shoes because they're recovery shoes. And I tend to be a minimalist when it comes to my routines and regimens. And I am always excited to sort of debunk and investigate what works, what doesn't, and why do we think it works if the science isn't really there.
Yeah, I kind of have had the opposite tack for a long time where if I feel like doing all that stuff is like psychologically telling your body it's not supposed to be doing long distance running. And if you just like get home from your long run and like drink some water, eat some food, and then go about the rest of your day, your body's just going to think, oh, this is what we do. As opposed to like, oh, now I need to recover from that. That's probably very stupid and misguided, but it's worked so far, I guess.
But for the low price of $300 a month, you too could be a part in the Zoe Rome 3-step Pizza Knit Recover Ultra Running System and experience the performance breakthroughs of a lifetime.
I'm Christie Aschwanden. I am a freelance journalist, podcaster, author, speaker. I also am executive director of the Grand Mesa Nordic Council, which is a really killer cross-country ski area in Western Colorado.
It's very true. Made my first adventure out there last year.
Great.
But in addition to being a journalist, you sort of started your athletic career as a high school track star. You were a national collegiate cycling champion, elite Nordic ski racer for Team Rossignol in Europe. And then you became one of the best science journalists in the country. So I'm curious, how did that happen? What's the through line there?
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been a science journalist for a long time. I went to university. I thought I was going to be a scientist. Then I realized that doing science is really boring. I really enjoyed talking about science and thinking about it and talking to researchers about their research. But the actual data collection can be really tedious and slow and boring. And so decided I wanted to switch over to writing about science. So I started doing that, and it ended up being something I kind of bucked all the things people told me to do. I went to this 1-year science journalism program at University of Santa Cruz University of Colorado, Santa Cruz. Oh my God, I really fucked that up. University of California, Santa Cruz. So I went there, and then you're supposed to go get a job at a magazine or something. But I wanted to move back to Boulder. I'd just gotten married. My husband is a bike racer, and just wanted to kind of go back and live the Boulder lifestyle. So I did that, and I just started freelancing right away. And I found that it was a really great way to sort of balance my sports stuff and all of the other things that I like to do in my life with work. And so I've been mostly a freelancer. I worked as the lead science writer for FiveThirtyEight for 4 years. So I did have a short time when I was on staff, but I really like working independently.
Yeah, some of you you're very humble about the space. Some of your bylines are Washington Post, New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. So you're doing well.
Well, thank you.
And it's a gangbusters time for myth busting and fact checking in the realm of science. And I'd be curious, how does your athletic identity and background in sports shape how you approach reporting? Does being an athlete help make you a better science journalist, a different one, a more skeptical one in some way?
That's such an interesting question. I've never been asked that. I've been asked a million questions, but never that. I think when it comes to reporting on sports science, it's probably made me a little bit more skeptical because as an athlete, one of the most important things that an athlete needs to do is learn to read and understand their own bodies. And, that doesn't mean, like, my friend Dave Epstein has this great saying that I turn to a lot, which is that just because you're a bird doesn't make you an ornithologist. So, I don't want to overstate it. Like, I'm an athlete, so I know everything about bodies and physiology, but I think it gives you sort of a bullshit detector. Like, if some thing is magic, I'm going to know about it. Like, I don't need your stupid study to learn it, right? And a lot of the stuff, I kind of call it science washing. Like, they use these scientific terms, or they do these crappy little studies to just give, basically a useless thing some sort of veneer of science and legitimacy, to try and make it seem bona fide. And so I really don't have much tolerance for that.
So, and I mean, just from my little N of one is that I actually feel like I struggle to be more rational when it comes to myself and my body, because
Interesting.
it would be so convenient if some of these things were true. In
Sure.
fact, like if this thing was a silver bullet, or if it
Yeah.
did confer upon me like some performance edge. And so I always feel like I have to be additionally skeptical when it comes to like
Mhm.
trying to apply some principle of exercise physiology to myself, because I feel like my biggest blind spot is a big old Zoe-shaped hole.
Yeah, and these companies really, they play on that. Everyone's afraid it's the FOMO effect, right? No one wants to miss this chance to optimize. And now, we're living at this time when everyone's optimizing everything, and it's ridiculous because I go out, when my book came out, I did a lot of speaking events, and I would have these like people from Silicon Valley, like these very high performing like CEOs who would tell me, what do you think about this supplement or this, that, or the other thing? And I would say, well, how many hours of sleep are you getting? And 5 hours. It's like, well, I'll tell you what, there's nothing in that supplement that's going to do you better than getting a couple more hours of sleep.
Do you think, I mean, you've been doing this, you've been at this for many, many years. Your book came out in early 2019, correct? So
Yeah.
and
It's been out for a while.
yeah, my question is kind of like, do you think it's become, it's not quite, do you think people are becoming more science illiterate, but do you think it's become harder to separate, harder to find for the average person? Is it harder to find reliable actual information at this point over the course of your career?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that it is. And this also goes for medical stuff as well, because what's happened is, when I started my career, there were certain newspapers, magazines that everyone sort of viewed as credible, that people would get. We had sort of a shared reality, I guess, is what I would say. We no longer have that shared reality.
That time was really fun. I miss it
I know,
also. Yeah.
right? Right.
The
And
good
so
old
now,
days.
yeah, the good old days, fact-based reality. And now we have, it astounds me even. I have friends who are like scientifically trained, who are really good athletes, who will ask me things because they heard some podcast or they saw some influencer on social media who's basically just there. And the first question I'll ask is this podcaster selling supplements? Because if they are, like, just turn it off. Like, there's no good that comes from, basically grifter's going to grift, and they're going to try and convince you that they have the secret thing. And the problem, right, is that everyone wants the magic bullet, and there aren't magic bullets. If you want to be the best athlete in the world, you have to have chosen really good parents, right? Like, there's no getting around it. Like, there's no training method or whatever that's going to turn, Joe Average into the top athlete. Now, that said, there are a lot of things that you can do to make yourself better and to achieve your own potential. But most of those don't involve buying something or doing something really bizarre to your body.
Yeah, I feel like I'm straight up triggered now whenever I see the phrase link in bio. I'm like, okay, proceed with caution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The other thing, and I think this really extends to sport, I come from endurance sport backgrounds. So it's not the place where you're making all the big money, right? Like if you were going to pick to be a professional athlete, you're not going to choose to be a trail runner, right? Like that's not where the money is. But what happens is the top athletes in these sports, which, if you look from the bigger picture, might be considered fringe, but they have a lot of followers and whatnot. I mean, where do they get their sponsorship money? It's going to come from, the weird devices, recovery devices, from supplements. I mean, I've done a lot of reporting on doping in sport and talked to a lot of, the people that run the testing programs. And basically, you have the U.S. anti-doping agency that's basically telling athletes, please do not put the stuff in your body. You don't know what you're getting. And on the other hand, their team is sponsored. The U.S. ski team is sponsored by some supplement company, and so it's like, it's kind of trying to have it both ways. And I remember, when I was an athlete, lots of times, the sports drink that was listed on our water bottles wasn't what was actually in there because, it was garbage. We didn't like it or whatever. And so, I'm not saying that every sponsored athlete doesn't use the product, but it just doesn't go to show, it's certainly not the case that they got to where they are because of that product, right? And
almost sounds like you're insinuating they only support it because of the capital gain they have to make from it, not from like pure, authentic, altruistic belief in the function of the product.
Wow.
Yeah, right?
What is
I know, it's crazy.
Can you think of something that's like off the top of your head and say the past decade that's like that is the wildest thing I've ever heard an athlete actually promote or claim works for them? I'm thinking of like the early marathoners when wasn't somebody, I feel like they took strychnine or something like that during.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Do you remember this?
There was a time when people were doing that, yeah, which
is
like, just
what are you
ridiculous.
doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, icing is kind of an interesting thing. And, I think the reason it's so popular is that it's painful and you can so there's very good research showing that painful placebos are more effective than inert ones. So like a placebo shot is more effective than a placebo pill. But icing, it's really unpleasant. You kind of feel like something's happening. It also kind of gives you a rush. And so I think that's one, and it's one of the few things that I found that actually is detrimental. So like a lot of the stuff is just kind of useless and probably won't harm you. But icing and cold is actually something that can, in a lot of circumstances, actually delay recovery. It's not a gigantic effect. It's not going to ruin someone's career, but it's certainly not helping. And so that's kind of interesting to me.
Let's plunge right into cold plunges. You,
right.
You in fact have a chapter in your book called Cold War, looking at the phenomenon of cold plunging and icing and how in sport we moved from, I guess in the 80s and 90s, you would slap ice on any boo-boo or any DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness to try to curb, to a blunt, the training response. But we've sort of moved away from that. Counterintuitively, maybe the wellness industry has sort of taken up the mantle where serious sport sort of took off, and this has really become popular in the wellness space on TikTok with biohackers, despite the fact that like the research isn't super ambiguous here. Why do you think this is so sticky for people?
Yeah, you've also got the Wim Hof thing and all of that. And I think there's this kind of like Zen kind of thing of like, oh, it's all about, toughening up. And it makes you feel so good because you can withstand this horrible cold or whatever. Whereas I'm like, hey, man, go take a sauna. It feels a lot better. And, it's probably, there's no magic there either, but it will at least make you feel good. And that's one thing that I really came down on with recovery is that so much of it is really about helping you feel better and giving your body some downtime and all of that. And so people are always sort of like, well, what works? And it's like, well, if something's making you feel better, I'm not going to tell you to stop it. It may not be, from a physiological perspective, there may not be much we can point to that's really expediting things, but it's helping you along because it's helping you relax. And that's really what you need to do. And it turns out that we live in an age when people really have a hard time relaxing. And we sort of have this ridiculous and like ongoing pressure to always be productive. And this comes down, I'm sort of like, who listens to 2-hour podcasts? Well, I get it, because it's people that are doing 4 other things at once, right? And people just, we've really lost our ability to focus, but also I think our ability to relax. And, one of the things that I really counsel people to emphasize is that you need to have some part of your day on a daily basis that is just no pressure to be productive. It is just complete downtime, relaxation. I don't care if it's kicking up your feet and reading a book on the couch. I like to sit on my front porch and drink a glass of wine, but just where it's time where you're not doing anything, productive. You're not trying to accomplish something. You're just sort of being. And the other thing too, I go out and I see people constantly with the earbuds in their ears. They're out climbing mountains or skiing, or the thing that really gets me is cycling because it's so dangerous. And they've got to always be having, you need to be able to retain this ability to sit with your own thoughts. And like, to me, as a creative person, like, how could I ever accomplish a creative project without that time? I mean, I get my best ideas while I'm out running or cycling or skiing, when I don't have someone else's ideas in my ears.
You're after my own heart there. I like refuse to put in earbuds while running.
Yeah. Speaking with 2 of the least optimized humans left.
You kind of got into this, and I wanted to ask this question because it actually came up in the little intro that Zoe and I were starting to record. And I pulled out of, I think it was a piece you wrote for the New York Times a while back. It said, I tried dozens of post-workout tricks and found that most simply helped you relax or feel like you were doing something while your body healed itself, which doesn't mean but that doesn't mean they aren't worthwhile. And I was going to ask, what is something that makes you feel relaxed that might be surprising to people who listen to this podcast as a sort of low-key recovery method? And I literally wrote knitting ? Listening to thrash metal ? And Zoe brought up knitting as a recovery method as well. I don't do that myself.
Funny.
But
I
Huge
don't
believer
knit.
in knitting.
Yeah, I'm not a crafter, but I really enjoy. I love hot springs. I love hot tub. I don't own a hot tub. I wish that I did. Hot shower. The heat feels good. It also it is a vasodilator, so it does potentially help a tiny bit. I don't think it makes the difference that it makes is really helping you feel good. So if there's one thing that I like, it's heat. Sitting by this time of year in the winter, I like sitting by my wood stove, getting nice and warm. I also just really enjoy. I have a dog. Every morning, my husband and I walk the dog up the hill, and it's just kind of we're not doing it for exercise or training or whatever, but it's just time that we're spending together outside, connecting with our place, really feeling present in our community and our sort of ecological landscape and all of that. And I think that's a really important part of it. And so even though we're not actually literally resting, it is sort of a recuperative sort of practice that I really enjoy. And I notice I really feel off on a day when I don't do the walk. I have a really early meeting or something. And I find that when I travel, I really need to go out and go for a walk or something like that, just to sort of clear the mind and things like that. And so, and it's something, when I was working on the book, I talked to a lot of coaches who would sometimes, ask their athletes to do something like that. It's okay, maybe if you're a runner, go for a short bike ride around your neighborhood with your spouse or something like that. But having something that's just, you can be moving your body a little bit in sort of a loose way. I mean, it could be even called an active recovery if you want to really just be talking in terms like that. But I think where you're just sort of being present in your body. Another thing that one recovery method that is probably my favorite is massage. And there isn't a lot of physiological, there's all sorts of explanations that are given, it's flushing toxins and things like that. Well, your body's very good at removing toxins. Doesn't need help, especially if you're an athlete and you already have really good circulation. But for me, I think one of the real benefits of massage is you're literally just lying down and resting for an hour. You can't be doing something else. You're not on your phone. You're not, you're not listening to podcasts. You're really very present in your body, and you're also sort of checking in. And, if you've ever had a massage, you'll realize that very quickly oh, I didn't know I had a knot in my calf, or, oh, I have this thing there. And so it's really a nice way of checking in to see how you're doing and kind of, being, again, so much of it comes down to presence.
Yeah. I'm thinking what about having your dog fall asleep on your lap for 20 minutes and your phone's across the room and the TV's not on? Is that pretty ideal for
Oh yeah. Well, I like the cat on the lap thing,
Okay.
Sorry, I can't get up. But yeah, dogs work too, for sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Any domesticated animal that can prevent you from being on your phone.
Absolutely.
Ferret, whatever.
Ferret.
Yeah, that's
giant
right.
ferret. My house yak.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Potbelly pig.
Yeah. On that note, you had sort of hinted at this earlier, but you write about how there's this tendency that we tend to over-index on unpleasant things as being more efficacious, like foam rolling.
Yeah.
There's not a ton of compelling evidence that mechanically it enhances performance in a way that we can observe and measure.
Yeah.
Things. And I think that so many things, particularly in training and optimization culture, fall into these sort of dopamine fast. If it feels good, you're doing it wrong. It needs to be both mentally grueling and physically uncomfortable for it to work.
Yeah.
What did you find in your research and writing there?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also kind of this idea that we have to measure everything and be sort of doing everything full bore. And so many of these products really prey on this sense of missing something, and that there's this new thing. And if you don't try it, your competition's doing the new thing. In fact, it was really interesting. I talked to an exercise physiologist while I was working on the book who works with NBA teams. And he was kind of going out of his mind because at this time, those cryotherapy chambers were really popular where people, and I tried one. I mean, they're really unpleasant, but you also get a major rush. And like the particular one that I went to, the guy said, oh yeah, some of the Broncos would come and do this before the game. And I'm like, okay, here I get it. Cause you get this total rush. You're ready to like go kick ass. You also want to really kill someone because you've gotten so cold, right? But it's yeah, all of these teams were like, oh, well, this other team got one, so now we have to. And he was trying to talk them out of getting this. And they cost a lot of money, which of course those teams have money to spend, but he was like, you'd be so much better off spending that on something else. But as soon as you're thinking that someone else is doing it, it's really, I think the other thing that we have now is the whole Strava effect where everyone's always watching everyone else. And, if you've ever posted anything or seen things on social media, you know that it's just a tiny picture of things. So people are really getting sort of a skewed picture of what people are doing, in particular, what's helping them. Maybe they're not even doing, they may be sponsored by that product, but doesn't mean that they're using it, even though they might make a little video showing that they are, right? And so I think it's like, focusing attention in the wrong places is kind of a core problem that I see in this whole, enterprise.
This might be a self-interest question here, but I'm curious about, I've listened to a couple interviews with you talking about recovery and how, I'm phrasing this wrong, a couple ideas about recovery. And it's kind of like, well, you're going to be fine by the next day, or you're recovering for your next workout. What about these events? Like, I guess I think of like the Tour de France, but more applicable to our listeners would be like a multi-day stage race where you are running, say 50K, running and hiking 50K, and then having to get up the next morning and do it again. Is there anything that you would recommend? Like, I imagine you're going to say get as much sleep as possible before you get up the next day. But like, is there anything in those situations where somebody's going to be going for like 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row that is really helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, first of all, going into the event well rested is going to be really important because you want to have those reserves all full, right? Nutrition's important, and nutrition, there used to be this idea that you had this very short recovery window, and we know now that that's just not the case. It's kind of a relic of the way some of those studies were done. But you do want to make sure, it's a lot more important if you're going to be racing the next day to make sure you get that next meal, not waiting too long and making sure that it's, a really good meal with all the, and here again, like you can make nutrition really complicated and it doesn't need to be. I don't think that there are magic foods or anything like that. It's, getting enough carbs and protein and fats and just nutrients. And one bad meal is not going to kill you. It's really in that context, it's really about calories and, replenishing the glycogen and all of that. But yeah, so I would say, really being good with your nutrition and sleep is just going to be really important. And the other thing too, so in a lot of contexts with competitions, teams will do things like, I just got a query actually the other day from a ski coach who was asking, she had read my book and said, hey, do you think maybe I'm making a mistake here? Their team was getting up on race day early and they would all go for a run before breakfast. And this is just, a short mile or two just to sort of get the blood flowing and all that. But, she realized, hey, basically they're all getting up earlier to do this and asking, would it be better to just let everyone sleep in? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Like I see the benefit, there's some like team bonding and things like that. But from a purely performance perspective, you really, you don't want to skimp on sleep to do this warm up. That's probably, especially if it's hours before the event, you're probably better off letting people get up, having that, leaving the hotel or whatever as late as you can. And then maybe if you want to do a group warm up at the venue or something, that's fine. But, if there's anyone who's missing out on sleep and, lots of times athletes are not going to sleep super great the night before the event. So the other thing too is making sure that you have that sleep the week before. It's almost like 2 nights before the event is the most important night for sleep because you're just going to be, a little bit antsy and all that. And that's okay. And I think, the other thing with sleep is it's very easy to get really anxious about it in a way that will interfere with your sleep. And in fact, one of the things I talk about in the book is that these sleep trackers can actually be extremely counterproductive, and particularly kind of the wearables wearables, the things, the wrist-based things that people wear, because they're not super accurate. They're probably fairly accurate in terms of like how much movement you have, but some of them will claim to tell you how much REM sleep you have and things like that. And that data is bogus. You shouldn't focus on it. And there's actually a case report that I talk about where they had a person who came into the sleep lab. They were so concerned and really just, things were terrible. They weren't sleeping well. And it turns out that their watch thing just wasn't working properly. They were sleeping fine. But because of that data had made the person so anxious, and then they actually weren't sleeping as well because they were anxious about it. And so there's this whole, feedback mechanism. And there's a study that I write about in the book that I thought was really interesting, which is they brought some people into the sleep lab for a few days and they gave them bogus feedback about how well they'd slept. And basically people would that would completely influence how they felt. So if they were told, oh, you slept terrible, you're probably going to be really tired, that's in fact how they felt. If someone who had actually had not the greatest night of sleep was told, oh, you slept really well, this is really, this, good job, they would feel fine. Yeah, and you can't get through life that way. Like, I'm not suggesting that people get 5 hours of sleep and tell themselves they're okay, which people do, by the way. And, if they're tested, it turns out that their reaction times are really off. Their cognitive abilities are definitely impaired. But what ends up happening is if you're chronically sleep deprived, you sort of lose your ability to notice your impairments because you're just always impaired.
Wow.
Yeah. I know.
My baseline is just a default state of impairment.
Basically, yeah. So anyone who's recently had a child, if you have a baby at home, you're probably familiar with this, right?
I was just going to say, as a parent of a toddler, and I have like the sleep tracker on my watch, and there was probably a couple of weeks where I was just like, this thing's bullshit. I'd be like, I was up for 45 minutes, from 1 a.m. to 1:45, and you think I was sleeping great? No way, man. Sorry, it's not.
That's great.
Yeah,
I do have a question because you're in many ways, you're a data journalist. You wrote for FiveThirtyEight, this legendary sort
I'm a total
of
data nerd. Yeah,
data nerd. I think there's kind of this propensity for particularly athletes to think of data as more definite than it really is. My sort of gut check or my impulse is that it's a lot more, it's another proxy. It's another like one other piece of information to triangulate in addition to sort of the qualitative feedback or your softer feedback of like, how do you feel? Do you feel like you slept well? How do you coach people on how to understand data and when it's useful and when it's maybe, not as useful or not as like definitive as we maybe feel it is?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think it really comes down to, I love data. I love collecting. It's interesting, but you really have to think about, how am I going to use this? How will it change the outcome? Like, how is it going to change what I do? And you need to kind of decide that in advance too. Like, what am I going to use this for? What is the purpose of this? And there's a couple of sayings in sort of the data journalism and data science space. And one of them is garbage in, garbage out. So like, if you're getting crap data, like whatever decisions or things you're making based on that are going to be crap too. And I know that the technology is improving a lot, but like wrist-based heart rate measuring is not optimal, right? It's not going to be the best. And so if you're making all these decisions based on, things like HRV or heart rate that are coming from a wrist-based thing, it may not be the most reliable, and same for sleep stuff. It doesn't mean that it's useless, and it's a good starting place. And, if the thing is being sort of consistently unreliable, it's sort of a baseline that you can use. But like, you really need to be paying attention to your own body. And like, if you're feeling great and your watch is telling you you're not, like, believe your body, and vice versa as well. And so I think, I see that where athletes just are not trusting their own judgment and aren't trusting their own bodies. And then there's also this thing, it's called data obesity, where you just have so much data and it's like, well, why are we even tracking this? And like, what are we going to do with it? And I think before you start measuring anything, you need to say, what am I truly trying to measure? Is this data point, is whatever that thing measuring it, is this the right way to do it? And then how will it affect how I act on that? And if it's not going to change what you're doing, then you don't need it to begin with. Okay, there's that. But also, if it's not going to be very accurate, and a lot of times, people are sort of, there's another saying, you manage, what is it? What you measure, you manage. And so you may be really, it may encourage you to focus on things that are the least important. And so you really need to say, is this something that is really crucial? Is this the right thing to be paying attention to? And so often the answer is no.
What are some examples of things you think people overly fixate on just because we can measure it?
Yeah, I think HRV is one. When I first started working on the book, I was actually really optimistic. Like I said, I'm a data nerd. I was like, I need to figure out, I'm going to find like the magic formula. Like, what is the thing you could measure that will tell you if you're recovered? And it turns out there isn't one thing. But HRV at that time, and it's funny, it kind of was popular, then it went less popular. And I think now it's becoming more popular again, but it's something that people often use and it can be helpful, but it's not always meaningful. And I actually interviewed a guy for the book who came up with kind of an early recovery device thing that was measuring HRV. And he ended up sort of throwing that out and coming up with other measures for the thing because he found it for himself so unreliable. He said he'd run a marathon and the next day his HRV readings were saying like, yeah, you're great. Everything's good. And he's like, man, I just, I'm kind of tired. So, and again, it's something I think I'm not saying that it's never anything interesting to look at. And a lot of people may find that looking at something like that may tell you something. You may notice, if I drink a lot of alcohol, I notice that my HRV changes, and that's something that I can see that there's an effect. Or if I'm sleep deprived, it changes in a way. So I think that there are things that it can be helpful for, but I don't think that there's any particular measure like that that should be your be all and end all. And it's really, I think you should use it as a way to kind of gauge your own body and notice things about yourself that then you can go. So like when heart rate monitors first came out, I had one, I think we all did. And we're always kind of looking, but after a while, what your heart rate, what it feels like to be at your max or at 80% or 70% or whatever. And you don't need to look at the number, right? And I think that's what we should all be striving for. These are helpful tools, but at the end of the day, you need to know what it feels like for you. And particularly for something, for the endurance sports that I do, there are different factors that can go into things too. And so for instance, I'm a Nordic skier, and skiing is not something where times matter because snow conditions can affect speeds so much. And things like altitude can really affect things as well. And so if I was just trying to go purely on like speed or some of the numbers that I could come up with on a watch, it really wouldn't be useful. But what can be useful is just feeling like, how do I feel? How close to my max am I feeling? Do I know I need to leave a certain amount in the tank, but then as the race goes on, get closer to that line. And so learning what that feels like for yourself, I think is just absolutely essential. And those bits of data can be really helpful to learn that, but they shouldn't be the end of the story.
Chrissy, I have a better question than this,
Yeah.
but I was wondering maybe we can splice this in. Can you actually say what HRV is? Because I have it on my watch and I've just in the past few days looked at it and been like, oh no, it's low. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So
It's high.
HRV is heart rate variability. And so you would imagine that you don't want it to be variable. You want it to be really straight and narrow, right? But it's actually the opposite. And it's kind of measuring sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And so you want a little bit of heart rate variability, ideally, when you're in a rested state. But it's complex, and it's kind of something that, because it's not a straight and fast, there's a lot of things that go into it. It can mean a lot of different things. And I think that's one of the reasons it's not a good sort of one-stop record of how recovered you are.
Okay, thank you. That
Yeah.
helps. That helps me ignore it even more. My other question is, like you talk about like the data we get and the data obesity and how we may not even understand it or know what to do with it. But it's also this thing where we're not even paying attention to ourselves anymore because we have the
Yeah.
data. Have you thought about like a sort of term or phrase for that sort of myopia? It's like, it's kind of a thing about like social media and all the time we spend on our phones and devices, and like
Yeah.
we're looking at all that without ever actually asking ourselves how we feel. Does that make sense as a question?
Oh,
But like
yeah, absolutely.
the parallel
I think we need
myopias that we have.
Yeah, we need a term for that, right? Of like, people are so looking at all this stuff that they don't notice. And it's kind of like, the people, I see this in cities, you're looking around and sort of just following Google Maps to get to your destination, and like someone inadvertently, runs into the light pole or whatever. And it's just like that kind of myopia. And I just really really for myself, I'm always kind of trying to retain. My dad's a fighter pilot, and he always taught me about situational awareness. You always want to kind of know where you are and what's around. And I think about that a lot, but I think, sort of situational awareness for your body is really important as well. Noticing where you're at, how you're feeling, what hurts, what doesn't, that sort of thing. Yeah, so I'll just give you an example. So yesterday, because of my job, I ski a lot. I was up yesterday. I was going to do a longer ski, and I just noticed I was feeling a little tired. And so I kind of did a couple of work things I needed to do. And then I went up again today, and I felt great. And so I did my longer ski today because I was feeling better. And it was just like that sort of little adjustment and being able to sort of trust myself and say, oh, it's fine. I'm not training for anything. So this isn't like when I was training, but so often, athletes will have this training plan and they just have to stick to it no matter what. And there are times to do that. I mean, there's days when you don't feel like training and you have to suck it up anyway. But usually, if you are an athlete or someone who's highly motivated and you are out there on a day and just not feeling it, that may be just your body saying, hey, man, I'm tired. Like, give me some rest, And I think there's this sort of perfectionist streak and this streak that a lot of endurance athletes in particular have, where they feel like they've got to keep go, go, go. And they sort of, beat themselves up if they don't feel like training, when in fact, that's just their body saying, take a rest day. It's not going to hurt you. It's going to help you. You're going to be able to train harder the next day.
It's so funny because we have all these little devices, and there is cool technology being developed. These are, some of these things are novel to an extent, but
Yeah.
what the heart rate monitor between our ears is doing is already so nuanced and sophisticated. Your brain is already taking into account your fatigue load. If you had an extra espresso in the morning, if you're at altitude, if you didn't sleep well, all of those calculations are already being factored into how you feel. And then I always think it's funny when people assume that your Garmin readiness score is somehow this black box algorithm is going to be more advanced and somehow know something about yourself that you don't in fact know.
Well, I tested these things out when I was reading the book, and I would go out and run or do whatever with 2 or 3 watches on. And it was hilarious because these recovery scores, and this is the other thing, none of them will tell you, like, they're all proprietary, the algorithms, you know that their heart rate based at some way or another, because that's when, basically you can see the things that measure and say, okay, it has to have something to do with that. But exactly how it does it, they won't tell you. And it turns out that each one of them, will come up with a slightly different answer every time.
Did they all connect to the same heart rate monitor while you're wearing them simultaneously? Was that a thing you did?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm imagining this cartoon where it's like a runner and it's like their watch doesn't say they're being attacked by a lion.
Right.
So therefore they're not being attacked by a lion.
Yeah, right.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly.
My watch says I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm good. We're good. Keep going.
Yeah.
This is totally out of left field, but I'm wondering, as an elite athlete and as a science journalist, if you have anything to say about something like the beer mile, if you know what that is. My wife just brought it up because we have I guess ours happened like before Christmas, but we have a lot of elite athletes where I live in Missoula, and like many of them were doing the beer mile together. And she's like, I just took our little guy down to play on the football field, and there's all these like famous people vomiting and running laps and whatnot. And some of them were doing it with NA beer, some of it were doing it with beer. And then I know Gary Robbins, the ultra runner, has done it with eggnog.
Oh God, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, but like what's going on in the beer mile, like physiologically, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking it'd be fun to write something about that because I don't know. I haven't really looked into it. And I thought, I'm a beer drinker. I love to drink beer. I love to run. So it seems like a natural fit. But then I think about the reality of like, oh my God. And like for me, it's not even just the alcohol. It's like filling your gut with that much, like even if it was, sparkling water or something, that would be, I have, that. Yeah, I haven't tried it, and I think I'm going to remain a spectator.
I think my hardest ever DNF was a beer mile. That was not fun. Coupled with the fact that I also had to take an Uber home from the finish line because I was still 4 beers deep and extremely unwell.
Yeah.
Maybe a better question is, what is the worst liquid for a beer mile instead of that?
Eggnog sounds pretty.
I think eggnog's got to be it, right? Yeah. I'm just thinking of how that feels in your gut, which is not good. Yeah.
Not ideal. Yeah. Not ideal performance fuel.
Exactly. Yeah. The yogurt mile.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Ways to make it worse. Yeah.
Of course, we've there's the last, I say probably decade or so.
Yeah.
people's, ideas of inflammation, anti-inflammatory foods, anti-inflammatory things you can take to reduce the inflammation, blah, blah, blah. All that is, there's a lot of discussion around that. Could you speak a little bit about inflammation in somebody's like an ultra runner? Like what's going on, what's good, what's bad?
Yeah.
What are things to not do?
Yeah, I think the thing not to do is to take ibuprofen prophylactically. You could end up in ICU. Talk to some people with that. It can actually be associated with rhabdomyolysis at high doses. And when you're running an ultra, everything's just under so much stress. So that's not good. There's this idea that that's going to somehow reduce inflammation and help with joint stuff and all that. And it is possible that it may make your joints feel a little bit better, but it's not helping you in the big picture. And actually, inflammation is your body's healing process. Like there's a reason. And so you actually don't want to slow it down and stop it, which is not to say that if you have a headache, you shouldn't take it, or if you're feeling really sore, it can be helpful. But there's some pretty good data that it does slow, and it's a fairly small effect, but it does slow some of that healing. And so, if you're thinking you're going to be less sore afterwards by taking some ibuprofen prophylactically, that's actually not the case. And so I think, we've got it a little bit backwards. Like inflammation is kind of your friend. It's what's going to help you recover and get better. And in particular with, muscle soreness and things like that, there's research showing that taking ibuprofen after like weightlifting and stuff like that is not helping you recover. So that's kind of a misunderstanding. But, when I was a runner in my younger days in college, a lot of people would they'd pop ibuprofen like it was going out of style. And it's also really hard on your digestive tract. There's a lot of other good reasons not to take it. That it's certainly not doing what you think it's doing.
But if you catch like a flaming arrow in your shoulder as you're running, maybe okay to take it.
For sure.
You just got to stay hard and take it, Brendan.
Yeah.
You just got to walk it off.
Yeah. You sprain your ankle really badly and have to hobble back. Absolutely take it. It's going to make you feel better and get you through the pain. And same with the icing. Like icing a sprained ankle is really good for pain control and all that. It's not speeding the healing, but it's sort of trade-offs. So,
and I think it falls into this camp of training adaptation processes that are sort of misunderstood. And when the tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you have anti-inflammatories, boom, let's knock out everything inflammatory. Yeah. And I think we see almost a similar thing with hormones and cortisol, and a misunderstanding that any amount of cortisol is bad and it's going to make your hormones out of whack and you'll gain weight and your face will change shape and you'll explode into a column of flame.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's this idea about chronic inflammation, which is a different kind of thing than the kind of inflammation that, say an endurance or an ultra runner is going to experience. So I think you need to be careful about not conflating terms. But yeah, I think just in general, your body's really good at taking care of itself if you just let it. And so the idea that we need all these other things to help is a little bit misguided.
One of the, I think, big things you're tracing in your book is sort of how recovery became an industry, how it evolved from the idea of rest, like chilling out, reading a book, eating a pizza, to being this multi-billion-dollar industry with cryo chambers, the squeezy compression boots. You even mention one of my favorite parts of the book is Tom Brady's infrared pajamas, which, spoiler alert for listeners at home, are not backed by a robust field of research. How
shocking!
Shocking! So,
shocking!
Wow.
Shocking!
Put your credit cards away.
Just throwing them under the bus.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom Brady. How did we get here? Why do you think this became such a bit like? Where did the recovery industrial complex come from when it could just be something so simple?
Well, I mean, it's really just a marketing opportunity, right? And you have this captive audience of people who are willing to do anything to, athletes are really sort of gullible. I mean, they will tell you this, it's like they have their lucky charms and their lucky, favorite socks and all of this stuff. And so, there's just this sense that you want to be doing absolutely everything that you can. And, the winning margins can be very small. And so the idea here is like, if something can give me even a 0.5%, improvement, it makes a difference. And that might be true, but I think one of the things people neglect to think about is, what are you losing by pursuing this stuff? And in particular, so often people are pursuing the latest, greatest, shiniest new thing that's going to turn out to be bogus. And so you're just basically wasting time and energy and money on something that's not helping you. And in the meantime, are you doing the things that matter most, which are the basic things? And it's interesting that people just don't like the basics because they seem boring and they don't, they can be really hard to do well, right? Like getting good sleep. Stress is something we haven't talked about, but stress is extremely detrimental to recovery. And that's something that, you really, I don't say, eliminate stress because you can't. We all have stresses in our lives, but figuring out ways to really manage your stress is absolutely crucial. And sometimes this comes down to just really good planning and knowing, so for instance, earlier in the show, we were talking about how sometimes the night before a big race, an athlete won't sleep really well. And so knowing that, you make sure that the week leading up to that event, you've gotten really good sleep. So you're getting there rested and okay, I don't have to, not only is it okay if I get maybe a little bit less, more fitful sleep, but I also know that I've got some sleep in the bank. It's not something that I don't need to start this spiral of worry and anxiety over it because I've planned for it and I know I've acknowledged it. I've sort of, it's part of the plan. And I think that's a really important way of managing those stresses is just, figuring out the ones that you can't eliminate and figuring out workarounds so that they're not causing, you can't completely eliminate that stress, but making sure that it's not getting exacerbated and you're doing whatever you can to address it.
That touches on, we've kind of gotten into this a little bit, but I feel like I heard you say in another interview that when it comes to recovery, stress is stress.
Yeah.
And I think it was correct me if I'm wrong here, but like thinking like the day after, maybe you don't have time to take a nap, but if you have time to like meditate or just sit or basically not sit at it, like sitting at a desk answering work emails is probably
Yeah.
not recovery. Is that,
Right.
can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the thing that you started off by saying that stress is stress and to your body, it doesn't matter if the stress is intervals from a really hard workout or it's, getting delayed on your flight and ending up not getting good rest because you get to the hotel really late or, all kinds of other things that are beyond your control. But all of those things are stress on your body. And from a physiological perspective, they are causing stress and it's something you have to recover from. And so that's why, goes back to this idea of planning for stress. Travel is very stressful, even when it's good, even if you're going on vacation or something, right? It's like you might have to get up early to get to the flight. You're standing around, you're, sitting in this little can with a bunch of other people, some of whom may be sick. There's all sorts of things. It disrupts your sort of natural rhythms and all of that. And so I think acknowledging that and also figuring out for you, what are the stressful things? So one of the things that I've really done, and it doesn't always work, but I really do my best to avoid very early morning flights because if I have to get up at 4 a.m., I'm just like, it's just that night of sleep is disrupted. I know that my first night at a new place, it doesn't matter what, it's never a good night. So that's 2 nights in a row already. Okay. And then, oftentimes for work, I'm going to the East Coast. I'm a night owl. Like it's already bad because even if my first meeting or whatever is not really early, it's going to feel really early. So it's like, okay, I cannot take the really early flight to do that. I just can't. Now, things like that can be really helpful and just sort of understanding, what you can control versus what you can't.
Yeah, I like the idea of planning for stress just
Yeah.
as a concept. That's great. Thank you.
There's one other thing that I really recommend, and that is I kind of like to think of it as radical acceptance, where, and I guess this is kind of a Buddhist type thing. I'm not really Buddhist, but, just accepting, it's like, I think I have something in the book about how I used to, when I was ski racing, I get really stressed out. Sometimes my skis would get like, uh, removed from me. Like I get there to the venue and my skis weren't there and I get really stressed out. But I'm on this team where we have a whole fleet and like I'm gonna have some skis and that's not, so don't stress about it and just deciding, it is what it is. Something I can't control. I can do everything right. Same thing with injuries. This is such a typical pattern, right? Athletes really get into denial about the injury. And so, an injury that could be a week off from sport to heal ends up being a month or two or a whole season killed because they refuse to just accept. So I think that radical acceptance of the situation, the state, sort of figuring out what can I change, what can I control, what can't I control, and sort of letting go of that. And that's another kind of really good stress management system, I think, is just letting go of the stuff that you can't control. You can't. So make peace with it.
I mean, so much of these recovery modalities is just like a feeble human attempt to wrest
Yeah.
control of like, well,
Yeah.
I didn't know, offensively, no one asked me about my genetic preferences for myself as being taller and faster and having less frizzy hair and being less prone to cavities, which is hurtful, frankly. And instead of obsessing about that, I'm just going to freak out about my sleep score and start chugging ketones in lieu of, you know, sort of focusing on the things I can control. So, pivoting just a little bit in our last few minutes here, you are also a podcaster, and you host Emerging Form, which is a podcast about the creative process. What have you learned from hosting that podcast, and how does that tie in with both your work as a science writer and life as an athlete?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting. One thing that I've found is that it kind of makes me think that in some ways sport is a creative practice as well, and there's so many parallels about just doing things as practice. This idea of radical acceptance, I think, is really important in both things. Both as an athlete and as a creative person, you're working on a project. And there's always, for any big project, basically anything I've ever created that I've ended up like really happy with in the end, there has been a part in the project, including the book, where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? I don't know what I'm doing. What is this? Like, I don't know. And I have this huge stack of research and ideas and interviews, and I can't figure out how to put it together, and just sort of, I've just accepted this is part of the process. This is how it goes. This is good because it means I'm in it. And this is just, it's okay. Like, it's okay to not know. And I actually did a whole podcast series for Scientific American about uncertainty, which really gets at this too, because it's sort of like accepting, that things are uncertain. And I think I'm really drawn to uncertainty because that's where the magic happens. It's something you don't know. So it's a chance to discover something new. And I think uncertainty is kind of exciting in sport too, because you don't know, like, how is the season going to go? It could go either way. And obviously you want it to go really well, but it is sort of a status of possibility too. And I really like that.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. This has been
this is really fun.
Extremely fun. If you've ever wanted to run through a postcard, here's your chance. Run the Whites has brought back the Jackson Covered Bridge 10K, a classic New Hampshire race that starts right in the heart of Jackson Village and sends you out into some of the most stunning mountain scenery in the White Mountains. Yes, there are going to be some hills. It's New Hampshire. You'll be earning those views. The best part, this race is for everyone, all ages, all abilities, with a generous sunset cutoff so you can take your time and really enjoy it. Top 3 men and women, plus top masters take home awards, and everyone gets a custom Run the White socks, and there's pizza waiting for you at the finish. Registration opens at 4:30, gun goes off at 6 p.m., and you'll be eating pizza by 7. Register today at ultrasignup.com. Search Jackson Covered Bridge 10K. That's on Friday, August 8th in Jackson, New Hampshire. Thanks for joining us on The Trailhead. If you love this episode, leave us a review. Share it with your trail crew and make sure to subscribe so you never miss an adventure. Give us a follow on Instagram at TrailheadPod. And you can reach us anytime at trailhead@ultrasignup.com. We'd love to hear your stories, questions, guest ideas, or just to say hi. And don't forget to check out all of the shows in the Ultra Podcast Network. We're building something special, and it's just for you. We'll see you every other week, right here on The Trailhead.